Corrupt judge insults Jasmine Crockett in court. 5 minutes later, he's in handcuffs. In a courtroom where her defeat seemed all but sealed, Jasmine Crockett, mocked, silenced, and pushed to the brink, unleashed a stunning counterattack that shocked the nation, exposing a corrupt judge in open court, triggering a domino collapse of powerful figures once thought untouchable, and igniting an unprecedented wave of judicial reform across the state of Texas. She walked in without needing a spotlight, because the silence that followed her was louder than any applause. Jasmine Crockett didn't just enter the courtroom, she claimed it, step by step, like someone who'd been denied a seat at the table for too long and finally decided to bring her own. Her navy blue suit was crisp, her jaw locked with purpose, her gaze unwavering. There was no hesitation, no performance, just precision, grit, and a kind of quiet fury that never had to be loud to be terrifying. Jasmine had spent years in overcrowded public defender offices, sitting across from clients who couldn't afford a future, let alone a good lawyer. She'd learned to fight without backup, to win without applause, to stand alone in rooms where her voice was treated like background noise. But now, she wasn't just a defense attorney anymore. She was the state's special prosecutor, appointed not because she asked for it, but because no one else had the spine to take this case. And today, her target was bigger than any petty criminal. Today, she was coming for the empire that had bled Texas dry, the Lawson development machine. Charles Lawson wasn't a man who made mistakes. He made deals, handshakes behind closed doors, contracts funneled through shadow corporations, campaign donations disguised as community investments. He was the kind of man who had his fingerprints nowhere but influence everywhere. On paper, he built neighborhoods. In reality, he buried truth under concrete. For over a decade, Lawson had skimmed millions from state-funded housing projects, ghost apartments, fake construction sites, inflated invoices, all hidden behind a maze of legal shields and political insulation. The homeless numbers rose. Public schools crumbled, but his towers got higher and his donor lists got longer. Jasmine knew this wasn't just a fraud case. It was treason in a business suit. And she was there not just to expose Lawson, but to dismantle the protection that had kept him untouchable. She'd spent the last 6 months piecing together scraps, subpoenaed ledgers, disappeared emails, anonymous tips from ex-accountants too scared to show their faces. Every document was a landmine. Every interview, a risk. And through it all, she had faced whispers, roadblocks, and even veiled threats from within her own department. Pick your battles, one superior told her. This one's too big. But Jasmine didn't pick battles. She walked into them. She knew she wasn't just going after a corrupt tycoon. She was going after the system that fed him. The judges, the inspectors, the politicians who looked the other way, while the poor were evicted and the rich built monuments to their greed. She'd been told to keep her head down. Instead, she sharpened her blade. Now, as she stood before the court, her file thicker than most case records and heavier than the lies it had to cut through, Jasmine knew exactly what she was facing. She was walking into a courtroom where the judge had shaken hands with the defendant, where the law had already been bent into something unrecognizable, where truth had a price tag and justice was often auctioned off to the highest bidder. But none of that mattered to her, because Jasmine wasn't just here to prosecute Lawson. She was here to expose the rot beneath the marble, and she would do it the same way she always had, one piece of truth at a time, even if she had to drag it into the light herself. The question wasn't whether she'd survived the case. Judge Howard Gates didn't need to raise his voice to assert power. His silence alone suffocated the room. From the moment Jasmine Crockett stepped toward the prosecution table, he fixed her with a look that belonged in a courtroom from another century, patronizing, dismissive, and carved from entitlement. He thumbed through her file deliberately, page by page, not reading, just stalling, letting the silence mock her presence. Then came the strike. "Miss Crockett, I trust you brought something of value today, or shall we skip to the part where you waste my time with theatrics?" His tone was razor thin and dipped in venom. Laughter erupted behind her, defense attorneys emboldened by the judge's cue. Jasmine didn't react, but the air thickened. The insult wasn't subtle, it was targeted. She wasn't seen as a professional. She was treated like an intruder, trespassing on sacred legal ground, guarded by men like him. Gates leaned back, eyes narrowing, already bored. Taxpayer money, he drawled, flipping her exhibit over without glancing. That's never been the basis for baseless accusations before, right? The sarcasm landed like a slap. Every word was calculated to undercut her credibility, to paint her not as a prosecutor with evidence, but as a political activist playing dress-up in a courtroom she didn't deserve to stand in. His smirk was surgical, the kind that cut deep without leaving blood. To him, she wasn't just wrong, she was unworthy. And worse, he wanted everyone else to believe it too. This wasn't judicial impartiality. This was open disdain, cloaked in robes and gavel, delivered from the highest seat in the room. Jasmine stood at the center of the courtroom, her voice measured, her tone crisp, laying out the first set of facts in a case that had taken her months to build. But before she could finish her first sentence, Judge Gates slammed the gavel with a sharp crack, cutting her off mid-word. "Miss Crockett," he said with a theatrical sigh, "are we going to spend this entire morning watching you read numbers off a page? I was under the impression you were here to prosecute, not recite your campaign platform." His voice was rich with sarcasm, the kind that doesn't just aim to disrupt, it aims to discredit. A few chuckles rippled from the defense table, shallow and smug. Jasmine paused, refusing to let her expression change. She'd been insulted before, but this was an ambush wearing a robe. She continued undeterred and presented the first exhibit, a financial ledger detailing the redirection of public housing funds into a private LLC tied to Charles Lawson's real estate holdings. Gates didn't even glance at it. He simply waved his hand. "This is hardly compelling," he said. "Anyone can move numbers around on a spreadsheet. That doesn't make it evidence. It makes it theater." A hush swept over the courtroom, the kind that comes not from awe, but discomfort. People started looking at each other. Even a few reporters exchanged puzzled glances. Still, Jasmine pressed forward. "Your Honor, this document was subpoenaed directly from the city's financial archive and cross-referenced with Lawson's own filings. We also have sworn statements from 2 forensic auditors verifying—" "Enough!" Gates barked, slamming the gavel again, louder this time. "You don't get to stand here and bury this court in pages of financial nonsense. I asked for clarity, not confusion. If I wanted to be bored to death, I'd attend a budget meeting." This time, the laughter in the gallery was hesitant, awkward, uneasy. The mockery wasn't landing the way it had before, but Gates was too arrogant or too desperate to notice. "Miss Crockett," he said, his voice colder now, "are you here to prosecute or to perform? Because from where I'm sitting, this all smells a lot like political theater." The words echoed through the chamber like poison gas, designed to infect not just Jasmine's argument, but her credibility, her presence, her very right to stand there. Jasmine's heart pounded, but her voice never wavered. "This isn't a performance, Your Honor," she said steadily. "It's a fraud case, one with real victims and real consequences." She raised another document, an internal memo between Lawson's firm and the City Planning Committee, highlighting a ghost project that had received millions in funding but was never built. "This memo—" "I said enough!" Gates roared, the gavel cracking like a gunshot. "You don't get to dictate the pace of this hearing." Then with a venomous smirk, he leaned forward. "Do you always shout when someone challenges your narrative, Miss Crockett? Or is this how you compensate when your case starts to fall apart?" The insult hung in the air like ash, and this time, there was no laughter, just stunned silence. Someone in the gallery muttered, "That's not right." Another reporter started scribbling faster. A court clerk looked up from her keyboard, momentarily frozen, because this wasn't judicial skepticism anymore. It was hostility, raw, public, and aimed directly at the woman who had dared to pull back the curtain on the machine. Jasmine knew exactly what was happening. She was being undermined, not because her evidence was weak, but because it was dangerously strong. Gates wasn't trying to dismiss her. He was trying to dismantle her. Right here, in front of the press, in front of the people. Jasmine stood firm, hands steady, voice unwavering, her every movement radiating composure under fire. The tension in the room could have snapped steel, and yet she remained unshaken, her focus like a laser trained on the man who had spent the last hour trying to tear down everything she'd built. She didn't retaliate with emotion. She retaliated with truth. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm but unyielding, "you've repeatedly questioned the relevance of my evidence. I understand. So allow me to be very clear." She picked up a thick, sealed envelope from her case file and handed it to the bailiff. The courtroom screen flickered on as he passed it to the clerk. "What you are now seeing is a formal financial authorization form, pulled from the city's encrypted budget archive, cross-verified with Lawson's internal accounts, and authenticated via third-party forensic review." She paused, letting the words sink in. "It documents a $4.2 million reallocation from the South River Housing Fund to a shell company, LGL Urban Planning. No employees, no completed work, no tax history." Then came the knife. And this document was signed on a late Sunday evening by none other than Judge Howard Gates. A low, stunned murmur rolled through the courtroom like thunderclouds moving in slow motion. No one said a word, but no one could look away. On the screen was the judge's digital signature, time-stamped and linked to his personal login credentials from a courthouse workstation. Jasmine let the image linger, stepping aside so everyone could see. Gates sat still, but it was the stillness of a man cornered, his lips pressed into a line, his hands curled slightly around the edge of the bench. Jasmine continued, sharp as steel. "We traced the transaction's approval back to this very building. The override was issued without committee approval, bypassing 2 mandatory checks, and transferred to an account that connects directly to Charles Lawson's offshore holdings." Gates finally spoke, but his voice had lost its edge. "That's not admissible," he snapped, trying to steady himself. "It's circumstantial at best, and improperly obtained." Jasmine didn't flinch. "Respectfully, Your Honor, the subpoena was signed by Judge Matheson of the Federal Circuit. The file was extracted through a court-ordered audit. Every byte of this document is traceable, certified, and time-stamped." Her tone never rose above formal, but every syllable struck like a drumbeat. "If your objection is based on discomfort rather than legality, I suggest we clarify the record for accuracy, not convenience." The room was shifting. Reporters leaned forward. Courtroom sketch artists froze midline. The audience, once subdued, now buzzed with quiet energy. The courtroom was becoming something else, a reckoning. One woman in the third row whispered, "Is that real?" Another man fumbled for his phone, texting as fast as his fingers could type. Jasmine stepped toward the bench, never once breaking eye contact. "This signature," she said, pointing to the projected document, "does not just show involvement. It shows access, authority, intent. You, Judge Gates, approved the release of state housing funds to a ghost corporation linked to the very defendant you've repeatedly shielded in this courtroom." She took a breath, then delivered the blow. "And that, Your Honor, is not just unethical. It's criminal." Gates's hand twitched toward the gavel, but it didn't drop. He looked down at the document, then at the murmuring courtroom, then at Jasmine, her stance firm, her eyes locked on his, not with contempt, but with certainty. For the first time in the trial, the power had shifted. It was no longer his courtroom. It was hers. He cleared his throat louder than necessary, trying to reclaim the moment. "This document will be stricken from the record," he declared, voice wavering just slightly. "It was not disclosed in preliminary evidence and was introduced improperly." The gallery erupted, not with shouting but with outrage and whispers, the kind that spreads faster than fire. "He's just burying it," someone hissed. "That's his signature." Cameras clicked. Reporters typed faster. Jasmine didn't react, not with rage, not with protest. She simply tilted her head and said, "The jury, the press, and the people watching live have seen the document. You can attempt to strike it, but the truth doesn't disappear because it's inconvenient." Her words, quiet as they were, thundered through the room. "You're not just dismissing evidence. You're trying to erase accountability. That is the very corruption this case was built to expose." Gates paled slightly. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrests of his bench. Jasmine slowly returned to her table, documents still displayed behind her, unwavering. She didn't need a verdict yet. She didn't need applause, because she had done what no one else in that room dared to do. She had stared power in the face and spoken without fear. And now the courtroom was watching the man behind the bench squirm beneath a light he couldn't control. Jasmine didn't speak at first. She didn't need to. The tension in the room was already razor tight, one breath away from combustion. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small black audio recorder. Her movements were quiet, methodical, but every eye in the courtroom followed her as if she'd just drawn a weapon. In a way, she had. "Since the court has repeatedly questioned the foundation of this investigation," she said, her tone flat but carrying a dangerous undertone, "I believe it's time we let the evidence speak for itself." She pressed play. A moment of static hissed through the speakers, and then his voice, cold, commanding, undeniably familiar. "Take care of that girl. I don't care how. Just make sure she never gets her hands on those ledgers." The words hit the air like a punch to the chest. Audible gasps rippled through the gallery. Phones were raised, pens stopped moving, and up at the bench, Judge Howard Gates went completely still. He didn't blink, didn't twitch, but his entire body seemed to harden, like a man waiting for the roof to collapse. Jasmine turned slowly toward him, her expression unreadable. "That recording," she said evenly, "was captured during a federally approved wiretap issued under Title III, with the oversight of Judge Matheson, and authenticated by 3 separate forensic audio labs." She held up a transcript, clean, certified, highlighted. "It matches the voice print and content of this clip, word for word. No edits, no manipulation. Just your voice, Judge Gates, giving an order to obstruct justice." Behind her, the screen flashed to life with the full transcript, the damning phrase illuminated in bold. "Make sure she never gets her hands on those ledgers." The words felt radioactive. You could almost see people in the room lean away from them. For a beat, the courtroom was frozen. Then slowly, the murmurs returned, low, urgent, electrified. A woman in the gallery whispered, "Is that really him?" A man next to her muttered, "He said it. That's his damn voice." One of the junior clerks dropped a pen, the sound unnaturally loud against the marble. Gates's hand twitched toward his gavel, but he didn't slam it. Not yet. "This is outrageous," he said, voice tight. "That recording could have been taken out of context. It proves nothing." But the tremble in his words gave him away. Jasmine stepped forward. "Then let me provide the context," she said. She clicked again, and a second voice emerged on the recording. Unidentified, nervous, replying, "Understood, sir. I'll make sure she never sees the ledger files. We'll move them by tomorrow." Jasmine didn't look at the judge. She didn't have to. "That's a conspiracy, Your Honor," she said. "That's intent. That's obstruction. And that's you giving the order." Gates stood, red-faced, gavel in hand now, voice rising to a roar. "This hearing is over," he barked. "I will not sit here and be ambushed by this nonsense. This is a setup. This is political." But no one was looking at Jasmine now. Everyone was looking at him. The judge who had ruled over this courtroom like a monarch now looked like a man about to drown. "You don't get to end the hearing," Jasmine said quietly, but her voice carried like thunder. "You don't get to rewrite the record just because the truth has finally caught up with you." Gates slammed the gavel. Once, twice. "Enough! Sit down!" he shouted, the command cracking under the weight of panic. But his authority no longer held. Reporters stood, recording. Lawyers whispered. Security glanced toward the door. Then came the question. Jasmine stepped closer to the bench, her voice cutting through the chaos like a scalpel. "Who were you talking to, Judge Gates?" she asked slowly, coldly. "Who were you instructing to hide the evidence from this court?" She held up the transcript again. "Because we both know you weren't speaking in the abstract." Gates opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The words were gone. The lies were outmatched. "Was it Charles Lawson?" Jasmine continued. "Was it someone inside city planning? Another judge? Or are you ready to tell this courtroom the truth for once in your career?" The room was silent again, not from obedience, but from revelation. The mask had fallen. The robe no longer shielded him. The gavel, once feared, now looked like a hollow prop in a bad play. And at the center of it all, calm as ever, Jasmine stood unmoved. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't cracked. She'd simply done what no one else had the courage to do. Speak the truth in front of a man who built his power on silencing it. And now there was nowhere left for him to hide. Judge Gates slammed his gavel so violently it cracked against the hardwood, a sharp final sound that sent a jolt through the courtroom. "This hearing is over," he barked, his voice no longer composed, no longer regal, just desperate. "The prosecution has overstepped every boundary of legal conduct. These recordings, these allegations, this charade, none of it will be admitted into the record." His face was flushed, sweat glinting on his brow under the harsh courtroom lights. He straightened his robe as if it could restore the control slipping through his fingers. "Bailiff," he snapped, "clear the gallery. Now I will not be made a target in my own courtroom." The gallery buzzed with disbelief. People weren't moving. They were watching, waiting, phones raised, cameras rolling. Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence around her was doing the talking now. Gates grabbed the edge of his bench like a man clinging to a cliff, eyes darting, lips curled with rage. "You will all answer for this," he muttered. "Mark my words. This isn't over." But then the double doors creaked open, slowly, deliberately. The entire room turned as a federal officer stepped into view, his posture rigid, his face unreadable, the weight of the U.S. Department of Justice gleaming from the badge pinned to his chest. He wasn't alone. 2 other agents flanked him, every movement precise, rehearsed, and irreversible. Their presence changed the air in the room. It became heavier, electric, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. The lead officer lifted a folder, opened it with quiet authority, and addressed the room in a voice that rang like a sentence carved in stone. "Judge Howard Gates," he said, loud enough for every soul in that room to hear. "By the authority of a federal arrest warrant, you are hereby taken into custody on charges of obstruction of justice, abuse of judicial power, and conspiracy to interfere in a federal investigation." The room exploded. Gasps turned into shouts. Phones clicked nonstop. Someone dropped a coffee cup, the ceramic shattering on the tile. A woman in the gallery clapped a hand over her mouth. Even the defense attorneys were stunned into silence. Judge Gates took a step back, face ghost white, mouth working like he was chewing air. You can't do this," he stammered, voice strangled by disbelief. "I'm a sitting judge. I am the law here." His arms flailed as the agents approached. "This is illegal. I'll have your badges. You'll all be ruined for this." But no one listened. No one stopped them. Because at that moment, power had shifted. The man who had once ruled this courtroom with intimidation and mockery now stood alone, unraveling. One agent gently took him by the arm. The other produced handcuffs and read him his rights as the metal slid onto his wrists with a decisive click. The sound of the cuffs was louder than the gavel had ever been. Gates twisted, wild-eyed. "You're making a mistake. This is my courtroom. I've buried bigger threats than her," he screamed, jerking his chin toward Jasmine. But Jasmine remained silent, unmoved. Her arms crossed, her face calm, her eyes locked on him, not with hatred, not even with triumph, but with unflinching truth. This wasn't revenge. This was justice catching up. Gates tried to lurch back toward the bench, like proximity to his throne might save him. But the agents pulled him away, firm and steady. His robe dragged across the floor behind him, like the crumbling remnants of a once untouchable empire. As they walked him through the gallery, the room parted in stunned silence. People stood, not out of respect, but shock. The kind of shock that comes when a man who believed himself untouchable finally learns the rules apply to him too. Reporters followed, cameras clicking furiously. The sound of their shutters was relentless, like a funeral march of truth. At the back of the room, the doors opened wide again. The federal agents disappeared with him into the hallway beyond. And then, just like that, he was gone. And in the silence that followed, every eye turned back to Jasmine. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply looked at the empty bench, then at the evidence still glowing on the screen behind her, and finally back at the room full of people who had just watched a pillar of power fall. And without raising her voice, without taking a single step forward, she reminded them all. This is what accountability looks like. Charles Lawson sat stiffly at the defense table, but his signature arrogance, the smug tilt of his chin, the practiced indifference in his eyes, was gone. He was no longer the real estate mogul who had turned City Hall into a playground, who'd sip champagne with politicians while the poor were pushed out of public housing projects. Now he was just another man watching his world collapse in slow motion. His fingers gripped the edge of the table, white-knuckled. His breathing was shallow, his gaze flickering wildly between the empty judge's bench and the officers still posted by the door where Gates had been dragged out. The walls were closing in, and he knew it. The room that once echoed with his confident laughter now hummed with suspicion and dread. Cameras were pointed in every direction, reporters whispering like circling jackals. And in the center of it all stood Jasmine Crockett, unmoved, unreadable, and suddenly more dangerous than any law firm or lobbyist he'd ever faced. He leaned into his attorney, whispered something in a panic, then stood. His voice broke as he tried to address the court. "Ms. Crockett," he began, his usual baritone now thinned by fear. I believe it would be in everyone's best interest if we speak, privately, cooperatively." Jasmine didn't turn to him right away. She was organizing her files with deliberate calm, like someone preparing for the next strike. When she did finally lift her eyes to meet his, her stare was sharp enough to cut glass. "You're asking for a deal?" she asked. After siphoning millions from housing contracts, falsifying reports, laundering through over 20 shell companies, and watching an entire city crumble around you, now you want to talk? Lawson raised his hand slightly desperate. "I can give you names, judges, city council members, contractors, state reps." This went deeper than Gates. He was just one of many. The gallery murmured, shifting with the weight of what they were hearing. Jasmine stepped forward, heels clicking like a countdown across the floor. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Then stop trying to bargain with smoke," she said coolly. "Because here's the reality. The immunity you're hoping for doesn't exist anymore. Not like it used to. That world burned down with Gates's arrest." She placed a clean sheet of paper in front of him. "What you have is a single opportunity, right here, right now, to tell the truth. Full disclosure. No redactions. No games. Because if you think for 1 second I'm going to trade justice for your half-truths, you've severely misjudged who's standing across from you." Lawson looked around the room, eyes wide, pleading. "You don't understand. If I talk, there are people. This goes way beyond just city politics. These people play dirty." Jasmine didn't flinch. "So do I," she replied. Her voice was soft. The conviction in it vibrated through the walls. "You used your wealth to weaponize silence. You built towers on stolen lives and buried the truth beneath floor plans and bank wires. But those foundations are cracking, and if you really want to be on the right side of what comes next, I suggest you start talking. Now." Her tone dropped like a hammer. "Because I won't ask again." Lawson hesitated, trembling. His hand hovered over the paper, as if writing the truth might somehow physically wound him. The courtroom watched, breathless, waiting. Not just for what he'd say, but for whether the machine of corruption was about to finally name itself. Jasmine didn't move. She was a statue of purpose, letting the silence tighten the noose. Because she knew this moment wasn't about Lawson's fear. It was about how long the system had protected men like him. And now the system was turning on itself, and she was standing at the center, holding the torch. Jasmine stood at the center of the courtroom, calm as a surgeon preparing for a second incision. The air was still heavy with the fallout of Lawson's confession, but she wasn't done, not even close. She reached into her briefcase once more, producing a sealed red file embossed with an official Department of Justice watermark. This one was thicker, marked confidential, multi-agency inquiry. She walked toward the bench, now empty, abandoned by the man who once ruled from it, and turned to address the gallery, the press, the officers, and the trembling defense team. "Your Honor may be gone," she said, voice sharp enough to cut concrete. "But justice doesn't end when a robe is removed. The evidence we've presented today, the voices we've heard, the signatures we've verified, isn't an isolated infection. It's the symptom of something much larger, much deeper, and much more deliberate. She placed the file down on the clerk's desk with a soft but resolute thump. "I am submitting a formal request for an emergency expansion of this investigation," she declared. "We now have credible evidence that what began as a single corruption case involving Charles Lawson and Judge Howard Gates extends into multiple branches of local government, the city planning office, judicial oversight boards, and at least one state senator's office." The courtroom buzzed. Reporters looked at each other, jaws dropping mid-sentence. A man in the second row, a city council liaison, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Jasmine's eyes didn't miss it. She saw everything now, and so did everyone else. "In the last 72 hours, she continued, flipping open the red file, "my office has received encrypted whistleblower files, server access, logs, and a list of undisclosed campaign donations linked to over a dozen shell corporations that mirror the structure used in Lawson's embezzlement scheme. These companies, on paper, don't exist, and yet they've been awarded millions in public contracts." She tapped the paper. "By who? How? And how often? That's what this court deserves to know, and we will find out." Her voice rose not in volume, but in weight. Each word was a hammer, and she was building a scaffold with it. This is no longer about one corrupt deal. This is about a system built to reward silence, punish resistance, and bury the truth under layers of bureaucracy and political insulation. She turned again, this time, to the cameras, the reporters whose hands were trembling with urgency, documenting every breath of this new chapter. "Let me be clear," she said. "We are no longer just trying a man. We are exposing an institution. What we saw today, the arrest of a sitting judge, the confession of a billionaire developer, those were not endpoints. They were entry points. Portals into a network of abuse that stretches from zoning boards to campaign committees, from courtroom chambers to city hall conference rooms." The press erupted into furious typing. A reporter whispered, "This just went national." Jasmine let the tension build for a beat longer. Then she drew out the final blow. "We are coordinating now with federal agencies to launch a full grand jury investigation. Subpoenas will be issued by morning. No one is off limits. Every official who signed off on a rushed permit, every clerk who lost an audit trail, every politician who funneled donations through real estate fronts, they will be identified. They will be investigated. And if the evidence supports it, they will be prosecuted." A hush fell again, deeper this time, heavier, because now everyone understood. What had begun as a courtroom drama had exploded into something far more volatile, a systemic reckoning. Jasmine took one final breath and looked toward the gallery. Her voice softened, but it lost none of its fire. This case started because one community noticed their homes were gone, because someone dared to ask why a public housing project had turned into a luxury condo overnight. It started because one auditor noticed numbers that didn't match. It started because someone refused to stay silent. And now, she swept her eyes across the stunned courtroom. The silence is over. She stepped back, her shadow long against the floor, and handed the file to the federal liaison waiting beside her. Then she turned, walked back to her desk, and sat, composed, resolute, unmoved. Around her, the room buzzed with electricity. But inside that calm center, Jasmine Crockett knew exactly what had happened. This was no longer just a trial. This was a trigger. And the chain reaction had only just begun. The storm didn't hit all at once. It crept in, piece by piece. Quiet at first, like a shifting wind before the sky breaks open. Jasmine had expected resistance, of course. No one exposes a sitting judge and brings down a billionaire without rattling cages. But what followed wasn't resistance. It was warfare, waged in whispers, headlines, and shadows. News anchors began repeating strange talking points, almost in unison. Was this justice or entrapment? Was Jasmine Crockett's courtroom crusade an ethical overreach? Overnight, the narrative shifted. Reporters who once asked about facts now asked about her motives. The media machine was turning, and it wasn't spinning in her favor anymore. Every interview became a minefield. Every question was laced with doubt, and behind it all, she could feel it. Someone, somewhere, pulling strings to rewrite the story before it was finished. Then came the footsteps in the dark. It started with the same car parked across the street. Black, no plates. Different spots, same vehicle. Jasmine noticed it on a Tuesday night, then again on Wednesday. That Friday, the tires on her sedan were slashed. She called it in. The officer nodded, took notes, and left without offering any real answers. Her neighbor's security cam picked up footage of a hooded figure walking by her driveway at 3:12 a.m., just out of frame. And when Jasmine checked her own home alarm logs, she saw motion alerts at odd hours. But every time she looked outside, no one was there. It wasn't enough to file charges, but it was enough to keep her up at night, lights on, heart racing. She stopped jogging before sunrise, started checking under her car. And every time she looked in the mirror, she asked herself the question no one else dared to speak aloud. What happens if they come for me next? At the office, the air turned cold. Not openly hostile, but wary, brittle. Eyes dropped when she entered the room. Conversations ended abruptly. Coffee breaks got quieter. People she trusted stopped returning her messages. One senior prosecutor, someone who had once mentored her, pulled her aside and whispered, "You've stirred up something massive. You should seriously consider backing off. This isn't just about one courtroom anymore." Another left a post-it note on her desk. "Watch your six." It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. But Jasmine didn't turn back. She couldn't. Still, when the doors closed behind her at night and the silence crept in, the weight was beginning to show. She drank too much coffee, slept too little, started second-guessing herself in quiet moments. Not about the facts, but about the cost. How many more nights like this could she take before it broke her? And then came the letter. It appeared with no warning, no delivery, no signature, no explanation. A plain white envelope slipped under the windshield wiper of her car. Inside, one sheet of paper. Typed, clean, and terrifying. "I know more than what Lawson gave up. I saw things, heard things. If you really want the truth, meet me this Friday, midnight, Pier 19. Come alone." There were no threats, no promises, just those 27 words. But they landed like a hammer. Jasmine read them once, then again. Her pulse kicked up. Was it a trap, a setup, or the key to unlocking the real monster hiding behind all the others? The fact that the letter even existed meant someone was watching and knew she was getting close, closer than anyone else had come. She glanced up from the note, scanning the empty parking garage, the flickering light overhead, the shadows moving just a little too long. She folded the paper, tucked it into her coat pocket, and stood still for a moment, just listening to the silence. That night, Jasmine didn't sleep. She sat in her apartment, the city glowing dimly outside the window, her laptop open but untouched. She replayed everything. Every name Lawson had dropped, every reaction in the courtroom, every blank space in the documents that felt too clean. And now, a meeting, in the dark, on a pier, with someone who claimed to know even more. Her gut twisted with uncertainty, but under it was something else. Resolve. She had faced worse. She had faced men like Gates and Lawson and lived to tell the truth. This anonymous voice, whoever they were, had just stepped into the light of her investigation. And if they really had what she needed, she'd be there. Because Jasmine Crockett wasn't just chasing justice anymore. Now she was chasing the source. The fog rolled in thick and heavy, swallowing the edges of the pier as Jasmine waited, every nerve in her body coiled tight. Her phone was off. No backup. No recording devices. Just her, standing under a flickering dock light that looked one power surge away from failing completely. In the silence, she could hear her own heartbeat. Then, like a ghost stepping out of history, the man appeared. He wore an old windbreaker, hood drawn low, eyes sunken from lack of sleep, or too many secrets. "You Crockett?" he asked. Jasmine gave a single nod. "Then listen carefully. I won't say this twice." He moved close, but not too close, and pulled a small flash drive from his coat. This holds copies of every ledger Lawson ever buried. You'll find offshore accounts, forged invoices, falsified project bids, and most importantly, state contracts with signatures. He looked around, lowering his voice. One of those signatures belongs to the sitting governor of Texas. Jasmine's eyes didn't widen, but something in her chest shifted. What kind of signatures? She asked. Approvals, he said flatly. Land deals that never went to public review. Multi-million-dollar grants rerouted through shell nonprofits. Green-lighted zoning changes passed in emergency sessions with no records. The governor's name is on at least 4 of them. And everyone links back to Lawson's empire. Jasmine stared at the flash drive like it was radioactive. The man wasn't finished. There's more. I included time-stamped footage, security camera pulls from Lawson's corporate headquarters, him walking into Judge Gates's private office. After hours, no security, no staff, just him in a folder. 12 times, over 6 months. Jasmine's pulse kicked hard in her neck. And the folder? Branded with the state seal. I don't know what was in it, but it always came out looking thinner. He shoved the flash drive into her hand. I've burned every bridge getting this to you. I've got a plane ticket and a bag already in a cab. When the sun comes up, I won't exist. You want to blow the lid off this state? That's your dynamite. Then he turned, gave her one last glance, and vanished into the fog as quickly as he'd come, leaving only the hum of the bay and the weight of his revelations hanging in the air. Jasmine stood frozen, not because she didn't believe him, but because she did. Every detail matched what she'd suspected but couldn't prove. Now it was here, in her hand, one flash drive away from the collapse of an entire political dynasty. Back in her apartment, the city lights glittered far away, mocking her with their usual indifference. Jasmine sat at her desk, the flash drive still untouched beside her laptop. She hadn't moved in over 20 minutes. Her fingers hovered, not because of doubt in the truth, but because of what the truth meant. If she released it, if she made this public, she wouldn't just take down Lawson and Gates. She would ignite a political earthquake that would rattle every branch of state power. Elected officials, prosecutors, judges, lobbyists. Some of them might be allies. Some of them might be friends. But none of them would be safe. And she'd become the target of everything the machine had left. She could already hear it. The whispers of discrediting, the shadow campaigns to destroy her reputation. They'd spin her as unstable, ambitious, biased. They'd leak her past, smear her family. And if that didn't work, they'd make her feel unsafe again. The car, the footsteps, the slashed tires, those were warnings. Mild ones. The next might not be. She glanced at the framed photo on her bookshelf, her first courtroom victory as a public defender, holding the hand of a mother whose son she'd helped acquit. That moment when justice still felt pure, simple, achievable. And yet here she was, staring at evidence that could finally reveal just how deep the corruption ran, knowing it might cost her everything. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the sleeping city. 1,000 people walked past the Capitol building today without knowing its foundation had already cracked. She could let it stay that way, quiet, comfortable. But she hadn't come this far to be silent now. Jasmine Crockett didn't survive the fire just to become the ashes. She reached for the flash drive, gripping it like a weapon in a prayer, and whispered to herself, "They built a system of fear. I'm going to answer it with the truth." Then she turned, flipped open her laptop, and prepared to set the whole damn thing on fire. The governor's press conference was a performance, scripted down to the breath. He stood beneath the gleaming state seal, flanked by stone-faced aides, and spoke with the calm assurance of a man who had survived scandal before. But this time, the enemy wasn't a lobbyist or a rival party. It was Jasmine Crockett. "We must not allow chaos to define justice," he said, his voice smooth as silk, eyes hard as stone. "There are those who would rather see this state burn than see it govern." He never said her name. He didn't have to. The subtext was louder than the cameras clicking all around him. Every line was a dagger wrapped in patriotic rhetoric. Disorder disguised as truth. A political crusade masquerading as justice. The misuse of power by a single prosecutor who stepped outside her duty. What he didn't say, what he didn't need to say, was that this was a declaration of war. And Jasmine Crockett was now standing against an entire political machine. The consequences were immediate. By the time she returned to her office, her keycard had been downgraded. Files she had built for months locked. Her court access? Temporarily suspended pending review. Her calendar wiped. Her secretary, gone without notice, reassigned to traffic court in another building. Her legal inbox? Blocked. Administrative maintenance, they told her. Colleagues who used to smile now looked through her like she was made of glass. No one said her name. No one returned her calls. It wasn't a suspension. It was exile. A bureaucratic assassination by 1,000 silent cuts. She was physically present, but professionally erased. The system was folding in on itself like a wounded animal, and it wanted her blood to stop the bleeding. She sat in her darkened office, a once busy war room now hollow and cold. Boxes of files untouched, lights flickering overhead. Her phone buzzed only once that day, a text from an unknown number. Told you it was too big. She didn't answer. She didn't cry. But the silence clawed at her. More than threats, more than smears. It was this strategic void meant to starve her of resolve. And still, she stayed. Because truth doesn't retreat. It doesn't die in darkness. It waits for the light. And then, the spark came. It wasn't from a newsroom or a political ally. It came from a journalist who worked out of a basement apartment, whose platform wasn't national television, but a blog with 3 million fiercely loyal readers. His name was Eli Navarro, a watchdog known for exposing corruption when no one else dared to look. Late one night, Jasmine got the alert. Exclusive, full gates recording, surveillance footage, and the transfer trail they tried to bury. She clicked it open, and her heart stopped. Eli had it all. The uncut audio of Gates's voice ordering her obstruction, surveillance stills of Lawson entering his chambers at 1:43 a.m., data sheets tracking money from Lawson's LLCS into political PACS, linked to the governor's re-election fund. It wasn't speculation anymore. It was evidence. Eli's article was a digital detonation. Within hours, it had been shared over 100,000 times. News stations that once parroted the governor's defense started walking it back. Pundits who questioned Jasmine's motives now stammered over new developments. Twitter lit up like wildfire. Justice for Jasmine. Burn the rot. We see you. Protests formed outside the Capitol building within 24 hours, holding up signs with her face beneath the word truth. People who'd never heard her name were now chanting it. The media didn't lead this wave. The people did. Jasmine wasn't just a prosecutor anymore. She had become something else entirely. A signal. A symbol that justice wasn't gone. It was just buried. And now someone had dug it up. Inside her nearly empty office, Jasmine stood by the window, watching the night bleed over the city. Horns echoed in the distance. A group of protesters passed beneath her building, chanting her name, holding signs of Gates's face in handcuffs. Her eyes burned, not with fear, not with relief, but with clarity. The machine had thrown everything at her. Lies, isolation, threats. But it couldn't stop one thing. Truth once spoken doesn't go silent again. She turned back to her desk, opened her laptop, and began drafting the final motion that would name the governor as a conspirator. Because now the world was watching, and Jasmine Crockett was done whispering. The courtroom was packed tighter than ever before. Security had doubled. Cameras lined the walls like silent sentinels, and the air inside buzzed with anticipation so thick you could almost taste it. Outside, a sea of people flooded the courthouse steps, some waving banners with Jasmine's name, others holding signs that read, "Clean the bench and no one above the law." Reporters jostled for position, their microphones like weapons, ready to broadcast every breath from inside this historic trial. This wasn't just the case of the state versus Charles Lawson. This was a national referendum on corruption, justice, and whether truth could survive the weight of politics. And Jasmine Crockett stood at the center, not just as prosecutor, but as a symbol. She walked into the courtroom not to applause, not to ceremony, but to silence. A silence born of respect, of fear, of history about to be made. She took her place without hesitation. When her name was called, Jasmine stood slowly, eyes never leaving the bench. "Your Honor," she said with a voice that cut like steel wrapped in velvet, "the prosecution will now present visual evidence outlining the full scope of the financial operation in question." She pressed a button. The lights dimmed. The projector lit up. What unfolded next wasn't just a chart, it was a map of decay. Arrows snaked from public housing grants to fake construction companies, to nonprofit fronts that led to personal bank accounts. Lines connected city contractors, PACs, lobbyist firms, and, most damning of all, 3 sitting state senators. Jasmine spoke calmly as names lit up in red: Senator Maria Vaughn, Senator Alec Rios, Senator John Halbert. The crowd behind her erupted into gasps. The press went wild. One juror's hand flew to her mouth. Jasmine didn't blink. These weren't donations. They were bribes. Disguised as campaign support, they were laundered through shell companies established by Mr. Lawson's firm, all in exchange for zoning permits, vote steering, and suppression of oversight. Lawson's lead attorney immediately stood up, panic in his voice. "Your Honor, we request a recess. My client would like to renegotiate terms for cooperation." It was over. Lawson knew it. The arrogance that once radiated from him like a shield was gone, replaced by the desperate slouch of a man finally out of places to hide. He didn't even look up when the judge granted the recess. Jasmine remained standing, eyes fixed forward, knowing that what came next wasn't a victory lap. It was the unraveling of an empire. By the following afternoon, Charles Lawson had signed a plea deal. He pled guilty to conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice, agreeing to testify before a federal grand jury on all affiliated parties, including Gates, the senators, and several senior aides to the governor himself. The news hit like a bomb. Headlines screamed across the country: "Billionaire pleads guilty in largest state corruption case in decades." 3 senators implicated in explosive trial. From prosecutor to reformer, the rise of Jasmine Crockett. Within a week, subpoenas flooded state offices. A dozen top officials were placed under investigation. One senator resigned before he could be indicted. The governor's press secretary went silent. Suddenly, people who once wielded unchecked power found themselves hunted by the very justice system they thought they owned. But through it all, Jasmine refused to claim the spotlight. She turned down talk shows, refused a book deal. When asked by a reporter how it felt to bring down an entire network of corruption, her answer was unwavering. "I didn't come here to be famous. I came here to follow the law. That's all. That's what they forgot." Still, the public wouldn't let go. She became a lightning rod for a new movement. Citizens demanding judicial reform, accountability, transparency. Law students began citing her closing arguments. Her photograph was painted on the side of a Dallas building with the words, "Truth is relentless." But in her office, now restored, restaffed, and filled with new files, Jasmine sat alone, reviewing her next case. She didn't see herself as a symbol. She saw herself as a lawyer doing the job the Constitution promised, the job too many others had forgotten. And as the courthouse emptied that night and the sun set over a state forever changed, one thing became clear. Jasmine Crockett didn't just win a trial. She woke the system up. And now that truth had found its voice, it would never go quiet again. In a world where power often writes its own script, Jasmine Crockett's struggle reveals how the lines between justice and corruption blur until one steadfast soul dares to set them straight. She faced a courtroom so warped that even her breath felt like a trespass. Yet she stood firm, refusing to yield to the robed men who sought to break her spirit. Every move she made was met with cynicism, every shred of evidence dismissed as political theater, and every appeal she voiced was cut off by the sharp crack of a gavel. Still, she pressed on, wielding truth like a sword, refusing to let the arrogance of power silence the pleas of those who had no voice. Her stance illuminated an unsettling reality. That injustice is rarely a single crime, but a web of deceit spun by those who think themselves untouchable. And for every step forward she took, the system shoved back twice as hard, testing her resolve in ways that made every heartbeat a gamble. Yet Jasmine pressed her claim, not for glory, but for the countless victims left nameless in legal briefs in city slums, their hopes crumpled by boardroom deals. She showed that sometimes it takes a single match to burn through an entire edifice of lies, and the quiet light of conviction can outshine all the glitter money can buy. Her journey wasn't simply about prosecuting a cunning developer or exposing a tyrant in robes. It was about dismantling a machine designed to protect itself through intimidation and hidden favors. She became a target the moment she refused to let corrupt files stay buried. The moment she treated sealed documents and crooked signatures as more than just rumors. A system rigged to fail those without the means to fight back tried to bury her in procedural mud, hoping she would tire of digging out the truth. But as cameras turned and public awareness grew, she proved that a single flicker of integrity can ignite an inferno of accountability. Night after night, she faced threats that slithered out of phone calls and typed letters slid under her door, each one urging her to stand down or suffer the consequences. Yet, in every lonely hour, she found within herself a steely calm, a reminder that the fear belonged to those with something to hide, not to her. She recognized that the mightiest fortresses often stand on paper foundations, and one undeniable fact is enough to send them toppling. Each day, she climbed the steep hill of evidence, forging ahead despite the weight of her own doubts. And when she finally reached the summit, the machine's smug grin twisted into terror. Cracks in the armor of power began to show when sworn statements matched ledger entries, and hush money left a trail of electronic footprints that even the slickest officials couldn't erase. Jasmine's unrelenting resolve proved how easily a manufactured image of respectability can collapse under the pressure of authentic scrutiny. The more documents she brought forward, the more the courtroom's laughter died, replaced by uneasy murmurs that signaled a shift in the atmosphere. Judge Gates, once a looming figure who dismissed her claims with a sneer, found himself pressed to the defensive as audio clips emerged, playing his conspiratorial words like the echo of a guilty conscience. And though intimidation escalated, her car tires slashed, her name smeared across tabloids, she refused to kneel before a culture that equated silence with survival. In every new revelation, she saw the patterns of complicity weaving through city halls and governors' offices, exposing an underbelly of greed so raw it left the public aghast. Courage isn't the absence of fear, she realized, but the persistence in walking forward anyway, often alone. The roaches, scattering under the spotlight of her investigation, proved that darkness depends on secrecy, and once the secret is gone, the power collapses. Yet the more the machine kicked, the louder the calls for truth became. At the height of media scrutiny, she found herself perched on the edge of a far larger abyss than she'd first imagined. It wasn't simply a crooked judge or a single unscrupulous businessman. It was a chain of backroom deals, political endorsements, and rigged bids, each link forged by fear and sealed with dirty money. Her mind raced with the implications of so many complicit faces. Senators who turned blind eyes in exchange for re-election funds, city planners who approved illegal housing contracts in exchange for promotions. This tangle of deception threatened to devour anyone who dared question it, and the deeper Jasmine dug, the more she realized how far they would go to protect themselves. Late-night footsteps followed her home. Tinted SUVs hovered near her driveway, and ominous letters arrived warning her to drop the case if you value your life. Yet even then, her determination turned sharper, like steel tempered in fire. The mission transcended her personal safety, becoming a stand for every family displaced by false promises, every whistleblower silenced by threats, and every community left crumbling under misallocated funds. She recognized that justice, in its purest form, demands risk, sacrifice, and an unshakable belief that no one is above the law. And with each new day, she found fresh resolve in the voices of supporters who believed in her unwavering will. Because the alternative, allowing corruption to thrive, wasn't something she could live with. The turning point came when she unveiled the recordings that revealed the judge's carefully hidden intentions, his instructions to handle that girl and bury crucial evidence. It was a moment that hung in the air like a suspended breath, the entire room captured in the shock of hearing power condemn itself. Cameras flashed, pens raced across notepads, and no one could deny the chilling reality. The very man sworn to uphold the law had weaponized it against those seeking the truth. After that day, the walls of secrecy began collapsing, one fallen brick at a time. Shaken allies of the corrupt started coming forward to save themselves, each new witness adding another layer to the damning mosaic. Yet with every fresh testimony, the danger for Jasmine mounted. Desperation made men cornered by the law far more unpredictable and lethal. Nevertheless, she pushed the envelope further, revealing scandalous ties to officials and corporations who'd always considered themselves invulnerable. As public outrage roared to a boil, she stood resolute at the storm's center, embodying the notion that one voice, unwavering in the face of injustice, can echo louder than any powerful lobby. Her victory was no longer a personal triumph. It became a rallying cry for an entire system to confront its own reflection. But the aftermath was as harrowing as the confrontation itself. The governor's office staged press conferences questioning her integrity, painting her as a rogue prosecutor aiming for fame rather than fairness, manipulating the narrative to protect the establishment. Public opinion lurched between admiration and suspicion, fueled by a media environment easily swayed by scandal. Yet each time they tried to bury her in false accusations, she emerged stronger, brandishing another ledger, another affidavit, another digital fingerprint tying the conspirators together. Her resources dwindled, her allies were transferred or intimidated, and her access to certain databases mysteriously vanished. But not once did she bow to the pressure. Because in the end, the real power lay not in position or wealth, but in truth. And truth, she understood, holds a might that even the greatest fortress cannot withstand once cracks appear in its foundation. The fact that so many behind closed doors feared her spoke volumes about their guilt. She clung to the knowledge that every piece of evidence she presented chipped away at a long-standing structure of corruption. The more they tried to muzzle her, the more obvious their own complicity became, and the public, once apathetic, finally began to see the system for what it was. The essential lesson from Jasmine Crockett's story is that real change almost never emerges from comfort. It flowers in the tumult of defiance. She taught a cynical society that it takes relentless perseverance to peel away the layers of deception that powerful figures wrap themselves in. Holding a gavel or flaunting an impressive title doesn't bestow legitimacy on a person's actions. Accountability is what defines legitimacy. And though she stood on a stage mined with threats and sabotage, her unwavering stance lit a path for others to follow. Her resilience proved that institutions meant to serve the public can become breeding grounds for self-serving agendas if left unchecked. The outpouring of testimonies that followed her revelations wasn't coincidence. It was the ripple effect of seeing one woman stand unshaken. People discovered courage in her example, realizing that silence is complicity and speaking out, even alone, can spark a revolution of accountability. She didn't do it for fame or for the fleeting rush of a courtroom victory. She did it because that was her duty, the very essence of law she had sworn to uphold. In doing so, she unlocked the extraordinary power of a single moral stand against a tsunami of corruption. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.